Today we've got an interesting malicious compliance story involving an underwear salesman. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, here's one that has probably never been heard. Years ago, I worked for a suburban police department, fairly small but average size for my state. Many people suggest that these smaller towns generate revenue off tickets and citations, and that is generally true. My boss, the chief, was in his heyday a go-getter, loved writing tickets, and therefore expected us to follow suit. I was a patrol supervisor, a sergeant, so I was expected to set the standard for the others to follow. One month, I'd been called in and counseled about my low stats. In other words, I wasn't writing enough tickets. Legally, they cannot tell a police officer to write tickets, and quotas are illegal, but your overall contacts, which include citations, written warnings, and arrests, can be used as a metric to judge performance. Mine were low, typically 20-ish tickets and warnings in an agency where most were writing 70 to 150 tickets a month. I didn't sign up to be a revenue generator though, and it didn't sit well with me having to make someone decide between paying a stupid ticket for a broken headlight or feeding their family. Anyway, I was told that I needed to improve my contacts. Yes, sir, was my response, knowing that he meant write more tickets but couldn't tell me to write more tickets. So, my contacts improved. Every single person I stopped that month, which, if memory serves, was around 40, got a written warning. No tickets, no revenue generated. The following month, after our stats had been compiled and posted on the wall of shame for all to see, I was called back into his office. "You wrote 40 warnings last month and no tickets," he said. "Yes, sir, that sounds about right," I replied. "And none of those deserved a ticket?" Well, I used officer discretion, and in my opinion, none of them did. He was angry by this point and told me he knew the game I was playing. "I'm not playing a game," I told him. "You said my contacts needed to improve. So are they or are they not improved over the previous month?" "Oh yeah, they improved all right, you smart butt," he added. That was the last time I was hounded about stupid stats or contacts. Is anybody else actually surprised that, considering the history of and the, expectations this police department has, that OP was just allowed to just be a good cop after that point? If they're clearly angling and pushing their officers to try to write more tickets and generate more revenue, how did OP at the end manage to get away with an arm-waggling, "Yeah, you got your contacts up all right," and then never got any more grief again? Paul Denap commented on the post, "Well played, sir. You nearly pushed him into saying he was running an illegal quota system, but his brain engaged and you saved him at the last minute." OP replied saying he was too clever for that. Instead, he had one of his minions, the Golden Child, do his dirty work for him. Our next story is, make me part of the fault-finding team? I'm gonna find them faults. Most of my stories of malicious compliance seem to come from 3 jobs. This is another from when I was working in IT at the college. It had been decided the world would be a better place if 2 of our campuses were merged into one. They were only a mile apart and the new site was 3 miles away, so there wasn't a big location issue. Sure, some people had a harder commute, but some got an easier commute. It's kind of equitable when you think about it. To make the new build a rousing success, there would be consultations, and people would be consulted, and everyone would be listened to. Yeah, you know that didn't happen without me telling you, don't you? Each department was to send a representative to the new build consultation group. Despite my best efforts to stay quiet or even absent every time the subject of a mandatory volunteer came up, I got voluntold to go. I, in all of my mid-level position glory, was to represent IT. I really didn't want to take part in a farce of a consultation, so all the mistakes could be labeled as unforeseeable. But if you're going to send a professional fault finder to a consultation, I hope you have a full load of ink in that pen. The meeting comprised 5 people from different departments, and Susan, who worked in facilities, so had been given the job of managing the new builds. No one seemed to think there was a significant difference between booking rooms for training courses, making sure coffee and lunch breaks were catered, and making a multi-million British pound building come into existence and transfer hundreds of staff and thousands of students over to it. After introductions, top of the agenda was parking. To be fair, I think it was smart to start with a contentious issue. Parking was already a problem, and the rumor was there would be less parking at the new site. This would be solved, apparently, by not having any student parking. Ignoring the inconvenience this would cause and questions over the public transport suitability, there was already not enough staff parking. So how was screwing over another group helping us? After a bit of vague details about somehow rewarding car sharing, we were furnished with a magnum opus of technology that would solve all our issues: a gate with number plate recognition. This would stop all those pesky outsiders coming over here and stealing all our spots, something that had never been an issue. I'd been quiet until this point as I thought it all a bit daft, and I was formulating a plan out of the job anyway, so these issues were unlikely to affect me much. But now we had hit on some technology, I felt the need to chime in. I let the others ask their questions to understand how a number plate recognition gate works. For those not aware, it's a barrier with a camera. When you pull up, it reads the number plate on the front of your car. All cars have a very standardized white front number plate in the UK. Translates that picture to letters and numbers, looks it up in a database, and if it finds a match, it opens the barrier. Once everyone understood the technology, I opened up with the problems in their happy path only thinking. I say, so Jan and I, points thumb at unsuspecting woman sat next to me, car share every day and she drives. But today, her car is broken, so we take mine. What happens when we get to the gate? Susan says, what do you mean? I say, my number plate won't be in the system, so what happens? Susan replies, well, it could be, even if you don't drive normally. I reply, that assumes a level of preparation. What if it's an emergency? Susan says, there will be a call button. You can speak to someone to get let in. I ignored the likelihood of that call system being managed, instead focusing on the loophole she had just opened. I say, so I'll just be let into this carefully controlled car park with limited spaces based on my say-so? Susan replies, and you said I could have my number plate in the system. Susan replied, yes, please to not be talking about the space issue again. I ask, which one? Susan says, which what? I ask her, which number plate? I have two. Susan replies, you do? I say yes. She asks why. I say, because it's illegal to use the same number plate on different vehicles. She says, oh, right. So can the system cope with more than one number plate? Susan replies, I'll check on that. While she took a note about the multiple vehicle issue, I reloaded, great. What if my other vehicle is a motorbike? Susan replied, I don't think that'll be a problem. I said yes, but I'm guessing the camera is on the gate and looking at the front. She said, yes. Motorbikes don't have a front number plate. How will it read and let me in? Susan replies, I'll check. She then wrote another note and brought the meeting to an end, citing time. A few weeks later, I'd heard from someone that there would have been another new build consultation group meeting. I hadn't been invited. Mission accomplished. Post note, the first winter at the new campus, 6 months after I'd left, I heard from ex-colleagues that the incline to the car park gate was so steep that when the first hint of ice turned up, nobody could get up to and stop at the gate long enough for it to open before they started sliding back down into anyone following them. You gotta love when you can get away with your only job at a place being the guy that asks all the hard questions and just makes everybody else frustrated. And it's not like OP was using bad logic here either. They were using pretty sound arguments, and it was just one of those exasperated, okay, fine, I get it, you can find anything to counter what I'm trying to propose. Tiny Tumbleweed 3041 commented, I'm glad you pointed out the flaws and not surprised they didn't invite you back. 2 heads are better than 1. You need outsiders to find the faults in your system if you want it to run smoothly. But that means being open to criticism, which I feel people who enjoy authority do not like. Our next story is Ask About My Genitals, Learn All About Genital Surgery Operations. This happened about a decade ago, back at the very start of my transition, female to male. I brought this story up in a comment on another subreddit and was told that I should post here as well. I had just managed to get my name tag changed at work, after months of my manager preventing me from doing so, and was now dealing with constant questions from coworkers and regular customers. Most of them weren't too problematic, just a lot of questions about pronouns and stuff. I was working at the post office counter within a pharmacy, so there was also the occasional medical question from the pharmacy staff. There were a few regular postal workers who would come in every evening to pick up the mail. This situation involved a middle-aged woman who had been coming in for several months and was usually chatty, but never anything personal. Typical how her day was going or how the weather had been, etc. One evening, when we were particularly dead and no one was really around, she must have decided that this was her chance. She walked in and without any other openings, just blurted out something along the lines of, "So, are you getting a dong?" This became the beginning of a long trend of me choosing to over-educate people about the different options of surgeries, how they work, what the end results might look like and function, and why someone may or may not choose to go down each route with no indication of which option I might be considering. And for this particular conversation, I ended it with something about how now she won't have to ask any other people about their genitals, and if she did, they probably won't respond nicely. She had stopped working and was just leaning against the counter, very engaged in the conversation up until that point, and now running late for her next stop. After that finishing statement, she became quite flustered and laughed nervously while she jumped back to work and rolled the bin full of parcels out to the truck. When she brought the bin back in, she was very quick to say goodbye and rush off. I honestly don't remember any future interactions with her. I hadn't really thought about it until now, but she might have requested a different route. Over the last decade, I've had several similar conversations with people, but they're usually friends or family, and it's almost always framed as, "What surgeries are you thinking about?" Now that I've finished with everything I plan to do, I have fortunately not have had a conversation like this in quite a while. I'm not sure what people expect to hear when they ask about someone's genitals, but it's probably not a deep dive into how reconstruction works. You know, even if you do know somebody like OP, and the thought pops into your head, I feel like it's an innocent enough thought, but you need to have enough tact to know that you can't just ask other people about what is going on in their downstairs area and what do they plan to do with that. Like, just think about the optics of it. If somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, what do you got going on downstairs?" Well, depending on the person, some people might be very interested in having that asked of them, but for most people, I would assume it's a very violating thing to ask. Pocket Universe commented, "You handled that beautifully." Once people are fascinated enough by a subject, they seem to completely disregard whether or not it's appropriate to ask. Our next story is, you want to throw a fit over the property line? No problem. So I bought a house in 2018. I had to in a hurry so I could get my mother in my old home before her chemo got intense. My family had outgrown the one we were in, and we found one that needed some work but had 5.25 acres and a chicken coop. Neighbor, Dan, obsessively manicures his property, and it's much nicer as a result. But the price and features worked for us on our side. We fix up and paint the chicken coop, only interrupted once by Dan asking us to tear it down or move it. Surely the coop was well on our side of the property line, I thought. I politely declined and described how the only thing I would be doing is building an enclosed run toward my house to protect the birds from predators after fixing some things inside the house that have been neglected. The previous owner was a serious alcoholic and there's a lot of work to do. Dan walks away angry but defeated. A couple of years pass and the run is built exactly as described, and our informal survey shows the property line about 20 feet back. And I build gardens roughly the same distance from the property line. Dan has a survey done that suspiciously puts the back corner of the coop and about 1/3 of the run over the property line. But we agreed that it could stay so long as I don't encroach any further and I eventually move it, which was my actual plan. He said to take all the time I need, declining my offers to buy the dirt or trade easements and reimburse him for the cost of the survey. Another year goes by, and Dan has changed his tune. He interrupts a target practice session with my 2 foster kids to demand that I demolish the coop and run soon. To which I said, I suppose I could push that project up to next fall, 2024. He isn't happy, but seems pacified. I wasn't thrilled either, but I'm a reasonable guy and would prefer to have a good relationship with a neighbor I don't like much. Enter May 2024. 6 months before I agreed to do anything, and this guy shows up in my backyard wanting to talk about the god-danged coop again. I said, "You know, Dan, you said I could have all the time I needed and then demanded I tear it down, going back on your..." Cue the most childish temper tantrum I think I've ever seen. He was literally stomping on the ground with elbows out, screaming about suing me and how he'll own my whole house by the time he's done with me. Malicious compliance, freak you, Dan. I decided the best place for that coop is exactly where it is. It's been there about 20 years and adverse possession only requires 10. I can take that 12 square feet of dirt from you and you'll even have to pay my legal fees. Only the run needs to move since it's only been there for 5 years. That's exactly what I did. The new run connects to the gardens and the roof funnels the rooster's crows right to his house. Setback requirements say structures must be 5 feet from property lines. The back corner of the run is now exactly 5 feet 2 inches away from the supposed property line, and he gets to hear and smell my chickens every single time he's outside. He will not have peace until he dies or moves. I am well within my rights, and while I do struggle with medical and PTSD issues for my service, I learned very well from the Navy how to be technically correct in a way that works only for me. Is anybody else just screaming at OP to get their own survey done? I mean, if OP was willing to reimburse this guy for the survey he got and move the coop off, what would it hurt OP to go with an accredited surveyor and have them come out and look at it? And is it not like a staple of what you should do when you move into a new place? Granted, as long as you can afford it. Our next story is, you told me to treat it like a finished product. I used to work for a company that constantly but carefully innovated with its employees and technology. I had a very busy job that involved a lot of travel. The company had computers at each of its offices. Employees like me would use them to manage all of our complex jobs and travel arrangements, which were core functions of the company. One day, I was at an office and some people from IT had a small table set up with a sign asking for 5 minutes of our time to help them make our computers easier and faster for us to use. I volunteered and they had me sit at their table in front of a notebook. Each page in the notebook mimicked a redesign of the computer screens that we used. The IT testers asked me to interact with the mock-up just the way I would with the computer if I had just now walked up to it and found it like this. They wanted to see how ready their design was for employees to use without additional training. I tapped buttons on the page mock-ups and they flipped to the resultant next screens in their notebook, all while using a stopwatch and making notes. I successfully logged in and navigated the menus to the function I needed. When I tried to use the function, however, I got stuck in an endless loop of trying to back out of it when I couldn't figure out how to use it. They kept flipping back and forth between 2 pages that each had a back button I was trying to use to get back to the menu. I stood up, grabbed my bags, and started to leave. They became quite animated and asked me to stay and complete a feedback questionnaire. I told them that I just had. If I had encountered a computer like that at work, I would have just gone to another computer, leaving my login active and compromising corporate security on that computer because it didn't work and I didn't have time to figure out what was wrong with it and how to fix it. They said that they really needed more information in order to get it right. I said I agreed with them as I walked away. That redesign never got implemented. I absolutely love that exchange. Wait, we need more help. Yeah, you do. Good luck. Also, I don't know what it says about me, but does anybody else hear this and think it would actually be fun to play around in air quotes on that computer testing page? I don't know what it says about me, but I feel like I would be really interested in testing out this new platform and trying to find a way to break it or show them there's problems with it or something. Sir Dynadin commented, "We use this type of paper prototyping for screen design and navigation, and it was quite successful. If the user gets stuck or asks for something that was missing, like a delete button, we would add a delete button to the screen and make a note to add screens supporting this function, then carry on testing. In the case you describe, we would add a home button so you can break out of the loop and start again, or ask where did you want to go and add the necessary button." It doesn't sound like these developers were trained properly on how to run this type of test. You need to start asking questions when the user has issues. One trick is to ask them to tell you why they pressed each button and what do they expect next. This is called thinking out loud. That's the whole point of this type of test, to find missing functionality or data. Our next story is how I became the pettiest customer in a Jockey showroom. One fine day, my mom and I set off for what was supposed to be a quick supermarket run, which, if you have an Indian mom, you know is never actually quick. We usually park right in front for an easy escape, but that day the parking lot was packed. So I found a little spot further away and parked, and that's when he appeared. Like a parking ninja with a personal vendetta, a Jockey showroom employee materialized and declared, "No parking here." Huh? I looked around. That's when I realized I had parked in front of a Jockey showroom, which is beside the supermarket. But hold on, I wasn't just going to take this guy's word for it. I circled my car like a CSI investigator, inspecting every detail. The findings? My car was beyond the shop boundary. I wasn't blocking the entrance. The giant Jockey hoarding, featuring some awkwardly muscular guy in briefs, was fully visible from the road. No parking sign anywhere. In short, my parking job was innocent until proven guilty. But this guy? He was determined to make me guilty anyway. He said, "No parking here." I said, "There's no sign that says I can't park here." He replies, "You still can't park here." I tell him, "I'm not blocking anything." He says again, "No parking." I say, "I'm outside your showroom boundary." "No parking." At this point, I realized this quarrel could last a while. So I turned to my mom and said, "You go ahead and shop, I'll deal with this." She, being the smartest woman she is, walked off to the supermarket while I prepared for battle. After a few more rounds of pointless verbal combat, I had an idea. A genius, petty, time-wasting idea. I said, "Can your customers park here?" He pauses and says, "Yes." I say, "Congratulations, I'm a customer now." And with that, I marched into the Jockey showroom with the confidence of a man who had absolutely no intention of buying anything. I started slow. "Show me a brief." He brought one out. I said, "Do you have this in blue?" He sighed and fetched a blue one. "Actually, maybe black is better." Another sigh, another trip to the shelf. 5 minutes in, I could feel his soul leaving his body, but I wasn't done. "I don't think I like these. Show me some vests." More running around, more wasted time. I studied each piece like I was choosing my wedding outfit, not underwear. Just as I was about to move on to socks, my mom called and said, "Where are you? I'm done shopping." Mission accomplished. I turned to the exhausted shopkeeper, flashed my most polite smile and said, "I don't think I'll need anything today," and then I walked out like I had just won the war. As I got into my car, I stole one last glance at him. He was standing there, staring at me, his eyes filled with rage, regret, and the haunting realization that he had wasted 10 minutes of his life for absolutely nothing. But the best part? A month later, I passed by the same spot and saw a different car parked in the exact same place. And there was no customer inside the Jockey showroom. That's when I knew he had learned his lesson. Moral of the story, if you mess with a man's parking, be prepared to sell underwear to the most indecisive customer in history. So I'm well assuming that this takes place in one of those like basic strip mall type situations where there's one giant parking lot and then there's like 8 or 10 different stores of varying sizes there. In those situations, I understand that you want to keep your parking spaces for your own shop, but it's kind of unmanageable, I feel like. Can you really get away with being like, "No, these 2 rows that are directly in front of my shop are for my shop only"? Like, are they really going to go to the extent of trespassing somebody because they used a parking spot in front of your store? DJacob205 commented, "I will respect signage specifying a specific store, but if it's a shared parking lot, as long as I'm shopping in that shopping center, I am legally parked." I would have told that guy to get stuffed, but I like your method better. Our next story is corporate overtime policy leads to less coverage. This one is short and sweet, and how typical corporate rules backfired. My department is technically on call while not being paid a shift premium for it. Although we do get other perks instead, so it isn't a huge deal, the company makes a small effort to try and call the people with the least amount of overtime first. And this is relevant. Well, we eventually found out that if we answer the call and are unable or refuse to come in, that time gets added to our overtime chart as if we'd actually worked it. And thus, we would be less likely to get overtime in the future, which really annoyed the money-hungry vultures. Whereas, if we don't answer and let it go to voicemail, our spot in the overtime chart is unchanged. I'm sure you can see where this is going. For some reason, half the department is no longer answering emergency calls, and nobody seems to know why. And being a corporate environment, asking the employees directly affected is only going to happen after multiple rounds of consultants are tasked with finding out why heck froze over twice, and several conflicting committees are formed to investigate the issue while sabotaging each other, competing for limited resources. So for anybody that might be confused on how exactly this works, let's say basically you do want to work some overtime hours for the pay, but you have something currently going on right now today, but you would be free the rest of the week. If they call you and you pick up and say, hey, I can't do that right now, those hours will still be added to your hours offered record, and the next time there's overtime, they'll likely call somebody else that has less hours offered. If you just don't answer the phone, you'll never have gotten those hours offered, and later in the week, when you do have time to do the overtime, you'll be more likely to be called, and you'll pick up then. Problem is, this hacky workaround loophole system means they're just getting less people to come in altogether. Our next story is check down, not up. I was a cook in the army for a few years in the mid-aughts and had a surprisingly nice deployment to Bagram, Afghanistan. We would have a soul food night once a week stateside, but it was replaced by steak and lobster when we deployed. Since it had been a while since the last one, the dining facility, DFAC, manager decided it was time to bring back the soul food. He was off that night and a couple of our higher leadership were in Qatar or on leave. So we had a newly promoted staff sergeant, E6, running the show. He was career Army, took forever to get his promotion, and excited about his progress. Meanwhile, I had just earned a demotion, E3 to E2, a couple of months prior, and this was persona non grata. So when I asked him where some of the items he took responsibility for were as we approached open, he was furious. He gave me a hurried butt chewing that ended with, check down, not up. So, 20 minutes later, when he told me the line was set up and to get out there, I did not tell him he forgot one of his items. We opened to serve, and our Command Sergeant Major, E9, and his newest guests were already lined up for soul food night. He requests a bit of this and then stops in his tracks. He says, "Where's the corn?" "I'm sorry, Sergeant Major, I'm not sure. I swear I saw some getting made." They reply, "You better have some dang corn. It is my favorite." Weird, but okay. I say I can get Sergeant Jerkface for you. He says, "Nope, I'll get him myself." He proceeded to enter the kitchen and begin asking questions. The new staff sergeant comes hustling out, looks at the line, looks in a warmer, and pulls out a pan of corn on the cob. I pull one of the extra pans of another item we had out, and he slots the corn in. Then he tries throwing me under the bus with the CSM standing there. "Why didn't you tell me the corn was not out?" I said, "Sergeant, you just chewed me out for this. You said check down, not up." He replies, "I didn't mean it like that." Then CSM pulled him over towards the snack bar and laid into him for the next 15 to 20 minutes. I had never been happier while on the line. You know, this story almost kind of takes me back to childhood when I feel like most people have been in a situation where you're trying to say something to the voice of authority. Maybe it's a teacher, a coach, your parents, and because they're all in their feelings or upset about something, they just won't let you get a word in edgewise, and they gotta find out the hard way that there's some embarrassing thing that's on their person, or they forgot something, or they're about to step into a pile of dog crap or something. Just that authoritative, no, you don't say a word, you just stay in your spot, you do your job, and I'll handle it. Splat. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy malicious compliance story, why not check out that video on the left? Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.